Most men believe the way to stay on a woman's mind is straightforward.
Talk more.
Text more. Try harder. They think if they just say the right things often enough, with enough consistency and enough effort, she will eventually start thinking about them the way they want her to. But here is the truth most people never realize. The men she actually remembers are almost never the ones who tried the hardest. They're the ones who said something small, simple, and unexpected, something that stayed with her long after the conversation ended. Think about this for a moment. Has someone ever said something to you, just a few words, and for some reason it stayed in your mind the entire day? You could not explain why, but it kept coming back, replaying quietly when everything else went silent. That is not random. That is how the mind actually works. People do not remember effort. They remember impact. And when it comes to attraction, impact does not come from talking more. It comes from saying something that creates a feeling. Because at the end of the day, a woman does not sit and replay every message you sent her. She remembers how you made her feel in a specific moment. That is what stays. That is what lingers. That is what pulls her back to thinking about you even when you are not around. Here is where it gets genuinely interesting. There are certain ways of speaking that trigger this effect naturally, not because they are complicated or perfectly constructed, but because they connect with something deeper than logic. They do not just sound good, they feel different. And once you understand this, everything about the way you communicate begins to shift. You stop trying to impress. You stop overthinking every word. And instead you start creating moments that actually stay in her mind long after the conversation has moved on to oh, what are most men doing wrong? If you pay close attention to how most men approach attraction, you will start noticing a pattern. They believe more effort produces more interest. So they send more messages. They explain themselves more thoroughly. They try harder to be interesting, funnier, more impressive. And on the surface, it seems logical. If you want someone to think about you, give them more of you. But in reality, the opposite frequently happens. The more you force attention, the less impact you create. Think about it this way. If a woman receives 10 messages from you in a single day, what happens? At first, she might respond with energy. Then she gets used to it. Then it becomes normal. Then it becomes predictable. And once something becomes predictable, the brain stops paying attention to it entirely. The human mind is not designed to remember everything. It filters out what feels routine and focuses on what feels genuinely different. So, when your communication becomes constant, safe, and expected, you quietly fade into the background. Not because you're not good enough, but because there is nothing emotionally stimulating for her mind to hold on to. Most men confuse attention with attraction. Just because she replies does not mean she is thinking about you later. You can talk to someone all day and still be completely forgettable. Because without emotional weight, words do not stick, they pass through. This is why trying harder consistently backfires. Long messages, over-explaining, constantly checking in, none of this builds curiosity. It removes it. And when there is no curiosity, there is nothing for her mind to return to afterward. Attraction needs space. It needs moments that feel slightly unfinished, slightly intriguing, slightly different from everything else she experiences. That is what creates replay. That is what makes her pause later and quietly wonder, why did that stay with me? To understand why some words stay in someone's mind while others disappear instantly, you need to understand how the brain actually processes memory. Because the brain does not function like a recorder storing every word exactly as it was spoken. It filters. It keeps what feels emotionally significant and discards what feels ordinary. And what determines significance? Emotion. The brain is wired to remember experiences that create a feeling, not just happiness or excitement, but anything that stands out. Curiosity, surprise, tension, something slightly unexpected. That is what gets stored. That is what gets replayed. This is what psychologists describe as emotional imprinting. When something triggers a genuine feeling, the brain marks it as significant. It attaches meaning to it. And because of that meaning, it becomes easier to recall later, even without consciously trying to remember it. The brain does not just store emotional moments. It revisits them. That is why certain interactions replay in your mind when you are alone, when things go quiet, when your thoughts begin to wander. That replay is what builds attraction over time. Not constant communication, not endless messages, but a single moment that stays alive in her mind after you are gone. This is why someone can say very little and still be unforgettable, because what they said carried weight. It created an internal reaction. And once that reaction exists, the brain keeps returning to it, trying to understand it, relive it, or feel it again. That is the difference between being someone she talks to and someone she genuinely thinks about. Safe words are also one of the fastest ways to become invisible. Safe messages, safe questions, safe, predictable conversation. There is nothing wrong with being polite, but politeness without emotional impact creates nothing for the mind to hold on to. Think about how many times a woman hears the same opening messages from different men. They all sound identical. They all feel identical. So the brain treats them identically. It ignores them, not because they are bad, but because they are entirely expected. Being pleasant to be around is very different from leaving a lasting impression. Pleasant fades. Impact stays. What actually makes something stick comes down to emotional triggers, the small moments in conversation that create a reaction without the other person even fully understanding why. Not dramatic emotions. Subtle shifts. A moment of curiosity. A slight sense of something unfinished. Because the mind does not replay what it fully understands. It replays what feels incomplete. When something feels slightly open-ended, slightly different from everything else, the mind holds on to it. It keeps asking quietly, what did he mean by that? Why did that feel different? Why am I still thinking about this? That is where attraction actually begins. Not in loud excitement or constant availability. In quiet curiosity that keeps returning on its own. Now here is the part that changes everything. 3 words that trigger all of it. The words are I noticed that. Simple. Not dramatic. Not romantic. Not complicated. But extraordinarily powerful when used correctly. Because these 3 words do something most men completely fail to do. They make her feel genuinely seen. Not in a general, surface-level way, but in a specific, personal, attentive way. And that changes everything about how she experiences the interaction. Instead of saying something generic like, you are beautiful, you say, I notice that you smile differently when you are actually enjoying yourself. Feel the difference. The first one is a compliment she has probably heard dozens of times from dozens of different people. The second one feels personal. It feels like you are actually watching. It creates a moment. And more importantly, it creates a question in her mind. When did he notice that? What else does he notice about me? That is where the real effect begins. Because now her mind starts replaying the interaction. Not because you said a great deal, but because what you said carried something genuine. These words also create imagery. They take her out of ordinary conversation and place her into a moment where she becomes aware of herself through your perspective. That is a profoundly powerful emotional trigger because people are naturally drawn toward those who make them feel understood at a level that goes beyond the obvious. More examples. I noticed you think before you speak. I noticed you do not follow the crowd the way most people do. These are not generic compliments. They are observations. And observations feel more real than praise because they suggest genuine attention, the sense that you saw something others might have completely missed. Once a woman feels seen in that way, you become memorable. Not because you performed something for her benefit, because you were actually present enough to notice her specifically. Here is the crucial rule. Do not overuse this. Do not force it. Do not turn it into a script you deploy on command. Use it naturally, only when you have genuinely observed something real. Because authenticity is precisely what gives these words their power. Without that, they become just another performance. And performances are felt immediately. When you do use them, say them and stop. Do not immediately explain what you meant. Do not soften the statement with additional words. Do not chase a reaction. Say it and let it sit. Let it breathe. Let her mind do what it naturally does with something it finds interesting. Revisit it. That space after the statement is not silence. That space is where attraction grows. The delivery also matters. Calm. Natural. Almost effortless. Like you're simply sharing something you happen to notice, not trying to produce a specific reaction. Because the confidence that actually moves people is not the confidence of someone trying to impress. It is the confidence of someone who does not need a particular response in order to feel certain about themselves. Attraction was never about doing more. It was always about doing what actually matters. A single meaningful moment can accomplish what hours of ordinary conversation never could. It can stay in her mind when everything else disappears. It can replay quietly when she is alone with her thoughts. It can pull her back to thinking about you without you doing anything additional to make it happen. Stop trying to fill every silence. Stop trying to prove yourself through volume or frequency. Create one moment that actually carries weight. Say less, but say it with genuine attention behind it. And let her mind do the rest.